Hello and welcome to Experts in Industry series. I'm David Poirier, the CEO of the Poirier Group, and today we're joined by Alan Middleton, the Executive Director of Schulich Executive Centre at York University. Alan's a very distinguished adjunct professor of marketing with a PhD in business administration, specializing in marketing, and has many years working in the marketing and advertising sector. He'll be helping us look at COVID-19 pandemic through both an educator's lens as well as a marketing lens, both locally and internationally. Alan, we're delighted to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation, David.
Great. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role with Schulich and as a marketer?
Absolutely. Well, I'm very old, and the only advantage of being old is that you can look over your life and say you've done a lot. So I spent about half my life working in marketing and advertising, about 25 years, working for a chemical company in Chicago, Esso Petroleum in Norway, and then a lot of my career working with the J. Walter Thompson ad agency. And that was the UK, Canada, the US, and Japan. I then saw the light or the dark, depending on your viewpoint, and switched to do my PhD late in life. So I started my PhD when I was 46. And got it, and then started an academic career, mostly at the Schulich School of Business at York University, but various gigs at Rutgers in the States, and then universities and business schools in Russia and China and Thailand and a bunch of other places. And my specialty has been branding and the whole issue of private label, public label, internationally. And then a whole bunch of other areas. So I teach that at Schulich School, but I also run their management education division, which does non-degree training for executives and managers. So I sit both in the training side, but also the marketing side.
Oh, fantastic combination, and what a great background. So we're looking forward to your insights on what's happening. What do you see as the biggest challenge that your industry peers are facing, and how are they combating this?
It's phasing. What we saw and most of our industry saw, and our industry I include both other business schools, but also private sector organizations offering training. When this really hit in North America, which is end of February and then particularly in March, people ran away. Organizations and individuals basically said, "Oh, we'll wait." So we may not cancel, but we're not going to go. And we said, "Well, we do have some programs online." They said, "No, I don't want that. We'll wait." So March goes through April, and April into May and June, and gradually people are recognizing if there is a new normal, it's not going to happen quickly. So gradually, and this really happened in June, July, big corporations started coming back saying, look, we're going to do it online. We've got to upskill our people, so let's begin to get on to us. And that's what we're seeing right now. Individuals signing up for programs is slow, though. We're not seeing in general, it's not just us, it's others. We're seeing still a lot of nervousness. Number one, how good is the online stuff, despite the fact that we've got great creds from people who've been on the programs. But there's also a bit of nervousness and, something else I'm doing for home if I'm one of the 45% who are working from home. And then, obviously, how many employers are paying for it? Because there are a lot of employers at every level are worrying a bit about how much of the staff we're going to keep and, all of that process. And we can say till we're blue in the face, what you don't want is untrained, not good people staying with you and lose the others. But, essentially everybody's under, tight financial constraints as well as personnel constraints. So how the future wraps out, we're going through this discussion about what the school system's going to be like, how much is going to be classroom, how much is going to... We're all going to have to get used to life being a blend. Even when we're back to whatever the future normal is, there is no doubt that we're not going to go back to sitting together in schools, universities, or businesses in the same way we did before COVID. Just no doubt about it. But I also have no doubt that the future does not mean we're going to do it all online. Right now, the technology still has some limitations, because I make a speech always when I'm teaching that half of what you'll learn in informal storytelling from each other when you're sitting together. And although you can do breakout sessions in Zoom and others, it's a lot more difficult, and you miss that. You also miss the change of scenery. We do a lot of training in organizations, but a lot of organizations say, no, we want it on your premises. We want to feel that they've got away from work. So the social aspect to this becomes really important. So let me link that into marketing, because that's an important element in marketing as well. We know certain industries have done really well through this. Zoom is making money like crazy, and all the high-tech organizations. Shopify has happily mentioned they're not going to have people back at work at all. So you've got some sectors doing well. The grocery sector not doing too badly, within retail, and a number of others. But a lot of people suffering, and they're going, what's it going to be like when we go back? Well, it'll be very industry specific. The airline industry knows it's going to be really slow recovering, and the business travel will be even less. So what do you do as a marketer? You've got to find ways, sector by sector, to recognize what are the hot buttons? What is it that people really want? And it's kind of interesting, as an ex-ad guy, we kind of went through the phase where nobody did anything. Then everybody seemed to have sympathy messages going out. I couldn't tell one from the other. I'm going to say, we know it's tough. You're working at home. We know you may not be employed. And they all sounded the same. The smart ones, the smart brands, got out there and linked what people's experiences were to the brand and what the brand could offer. So one of the things we saw, and I think this will be true for the future, is those who built credibility and trust in their brands going in and continued on that line will come out even stronger. So they'll continue to do really well. Those that adapted to not just say sorry, but adapted to deliver something that was of value to help people sort out their lives, probably got a better shot at being considered as an alternative. The third group is, have you maintained your distribution? Can you get it to people enough? Because in this world where we're very tempted to look online for new things, especially if we get a little annoyed at a supplier. We can look around so much easier, and this whole pandemic has trained so many of us to look around more easily, get more familiar with the technology, get more familiar with looking, get very much more familiar with getting it delivered at home. So I'm wondering what the traffic's going to be like when people come back to doing their normal driving. But in addition, you've got all the short distance delivery systems going on. So the traffic's going to be an interesting one to watch. But what else got marketers got to do about it? Innovate, innovate, and innovate. It's recognizing the new world we're in, and yes, it's hard to really say what it's exactly going to be like. So you've got to be prepared to pivot and move around a bit. But what are we going to be offering that will help people's lives? And if you think about working at home with kids, with some real uncertainty in industries, what can we do to help that? And it doesn't just mean make it easier. Sometimes it may make it more enjoyable. So, for instance, let's take the travel and tourism industry. They were a bit late getting on to Canada travel, but they're starting a little bit. I would think that's another major focus for the future. How much excitement can you build in to your travel opportunities within Canada rather than going internationally? So instead of agents saying, well, you can go down to Florida for the winter, how can you have fun in the winter in Canada? So it's that kind of transitioning around. So it's like all good marketing. stay close to what's on the mind of your customer.
We not only agree with that perspective, but I think we've practiced it in a lot of ways. The core that we look for with any of our clients, any of our team members here, is trust. And so we work to build trust.
Absolutely.
The interesting thing through this pandemic is that we didn't lose one customer.
Yeah.
Not even one was paused.
Yep. Not surprised.
Yep. And yet we know many of our competitors who are more focused on the product or price, and less on trust, have been seriously hurt by this. And
Absolutely.
yet we're further ahead than we were before. I think the other interesting element that we've seen, and I describe it as businesses become more human. You see kids running in and out of cameras as you're on.
And the cat walks across the camera and the dog walks across. Yes,
exactly. And so you're seeing people as people versus here comes the boss, or I've got a client meeting. I got to be prim and proper. How do you think that's going to affect marketing?
In marketing, marketing, and particularly marketing communications, likes classifying people. For years we classified people in media as between 25 to 49-year-old working women, as if a 25-year-old was exactly like a 49-year-old. We got over that, so we started doing better at that. And now we've talked about, and the banks have got used to this, and I'm not sure they've totally fixed it, thinking about their customers. Are they commercial customers? Are they individual customers? As if they're the same person, and there were two totally different people if they had two different roles. So we got to start thinking about people across the activities. So to your point about thinking of them as complete humans, where work is a part and leisure is a part and families are part, and how they work those things together. So I think more marketers' product claims and service orientation is to meet the needs of those three elements, the work, the personal, and the family, and how those work together so it can help people do that. It definitely needs to, if you like, be more sensitive to price issues. It doesn't mean that price discounting is going to be a big issue, but it does mean that for the next little while, whatever the new Chancellor of the Executive, the Minister of Finance says, we're going to have some tough times ahead. So money's not going to be cascading in. So people won't be looking for deals so much as being careful with their money, getting that balance between value and cost. So it's those kind of things. So trust, brand credibility, value proposition based on the particular product or service, and communication would be my last leg on that stool, which is talk to people. Listen to them. Don't just assume, and don't inundate them. Let them, again, in social media, there's been a tendency for picking up and throwing things at people. Well, some of the Facebooks and the LinkedIns and the others are in trouble because of doing this too much. So, getting that sense of, I want to hear from somebody, content marketing better be appropriate. So those kind of issues. The HR version of this, which I find interesting, is where you have an established culture, it's easier to work online. What's difficult is onboarding. People coming into the organization. And how do you manage it so they feel part of the culture and community? Now, a lot of good CEOs, we interviewed John Doig, who's head of domestic banking at Scotiabank. And he made the point, a wonderful line, I liked it so much, which is, he said, look, Canadians don't necessarily like their banks, but they can learn to like their bankers, the people they deal with. And that becomes really important. And the way you get to like your banker is if the bankers like each other and work together more easily. I use the banks as an example because they have an appalling ratio of people joining their call centers and branches and turnover in the first 6 months. And part of it is because this was pre-COVID. They weren't managing the onboarding, showing how they could get trained, how they could get promoted, how they could work together, how they could get the problem solved on behalf of their clients. That's got to be much more. And what I'm seeing going to be happening in HR, and hopefully your CEOs listening, is a flattening of hierarchies. We've talked for a long time about, yes, it's our workers are our most important asset and all of that. But frankly, a lot of that has just been talk. What I think COVID's done is to make people wake up to the fact their front line is really important, not just in healthcare, but at the grocery store, at the people they deal with on the phone when they're phoning up Rogers or Bell or TELUS. And hopefully what this says is we got to flatten that sense that there's the doers on the bottom and the thinkers above them. And you've got to merge the two much better together. That creates more rewarding for people coming into the culture and being online. It enables you to use distance to help train, but have events together so that people start sharing the belief in the culture. And I think that's going to be the big challenge. So existing cultures, yeah, they can cope with more distance. They know each other. But onboarding, and especially youth coming in, that's going to be the big challenge.
Yes, certainly. And especially with so many different options that people have, if they are working from home, working for company A versus company B, in many ways doesn't feel a whole lot different if it's the same job.
Yeah.
So it's going to be challenging to be able to attract and retain the best talent.
And we may have to go to more, there's all kinds of phrases around this, part-time work. And I don't mean part-time work which has got unions and people suspicious, rightly, because they see it as a cost-cutting move. But it may be to fit in the structure of people's lives. We may need to extend the way we've managed, and Canada's done better than the States, in things like maternity leave and paternity leave. We may have to extend that thinking more into people's lives. And use the word earlier, and you're so right, about trust. Just because you can't see the person working doesn't mean they're not working. So we've got to get a lot better at what our expectations for delivery have been, a lot better at the training of those, and a lot better at the trust that, if they're in trouble, they'll call, and you've got to create the environment so that people make that decisions themselves, even on the front lines. So I go to my grocery store, and I don't expect them to have to ask somebody an answer to a very simple question, because they should be able to do that.
Absolutely. So true. So let's switch the focus then back to education, if we can. And the challenges that we've spoken about in business are the very same ones that you're facing as an educator. How do you keep students engaged?
Absolutely.
How do you worry about their mental well-being while being alone in an apartment studying away? What do you see happening there? How is education innovating in order to respond to those challenges?
Yeah. You can think of education, dear Jean Piaget, who wrote about this, different levels. The real problem issue is very young, because kids of anywhere between 3 and 4 and about 9 or 10 learn so much by physically interacting with each other, and games and sports and touch and feel and all that kind of stuff. So there's going to be a real challenge on how you manage that. And I don't envy the school system having to cope with that one. The big challenge to schools then, up to the age of 16, 17, 18, before they go off to college or university or leave to go to work, is how do you make it not equal, but accessible for people who struggle more to learn online or are less self-motivated, have been motivated by a brilliant teacher because they got charisma, or motivated because of friends. I mean, I'll speak very personally about this. I was the world's stupidest individual at the age of 14 and 15 in the UK. And I was lucky to be in a school where two people moved in from other parts of the UK, and they actually knew who Jean Piaget and who great directors and people were. And I got totally turned on to literature and art and all those things in education because of my colleagues. And that teenage era, it becomes so critical. So how do you work with them at that to motivate people who are not necessarily that self-motivated to the online study to not lose out? And that's a big issue on money, because we know in poorer households, that's more of a problem. So there's the big challenge to make online engaging. When you get to colleges and universities, the same challenge applies, but in different ways. And I'll be blunt. Well, there's lots of good faculty at colleges and universities. So many, and this is more true of universities than colleges, are there because they're fascinated by the research. And the university makes them teach. And they're boring as hell. And they haven't updated anything in the last 10 years. There was one professor I know, I will not name her, not at York, who was teaching dance classes. And one of my friend's daughters went to the class. And on the first day, she wheeled in an overhead projector and started showing acetate slides. Remember those things? I mean, literally half the class never came back, because however good this individual was on the knowledge of dance, the way she was communicating it was so out of date and alien. And I'm afraid that's a bit of a tendency with a lot of people. It's got to be much more engaging. You've got to find ways through the technology to engage. And here's the risk. And it's a bigger risk down south, but it's going to emerge as a risk here, which is up here. Universities have had it relatively easy. You know, I mean, there haven't been alternatives delivering degrees until very recently. We were reasonably competitive with foreign students coming in. There are issues of people who did liberal arts may not finding a job, but it's fairly easy. Now, there are big competitors. Not everybody's saying you need automatically to have a degree, let alone automatically have a graduate degree. Competition is going to hit the traditional university education system. And the colleges have done a much better job at this than the universities. And I'm a big fan that everybody should study the arts, not just business or not just science, because we're trying to create whole human beings. But if you look at how narrow some of our programs has been, and I'll use an example of a system I admire a lot, which is the German apprenticeship system. You go on apprenticeship programs in Germany, you not only learn the trade skills, you learn the background to those trade skills, and you learn how to build a business in those trade skills. So that Mittelstand, the middle management group, is so powerful in Germany. A lot of that is because people have set up businesses with the skills, but also the learning from those apprenticeship programs that they develop their lives. We're typically Canadian. We're on the edge of doing that in a lot of cases. So a lot of goodwill, a lot of associations trying to make it work. But what the Germans have managed to do is pull it together into a system. And that's what I think we need. So, you know, for instance, the Schulich School of Business is getting closer and closer to the Lausanne School of Engineering, because the opportunity of having engineers think outside just engineering and think about management, but also think about conceptual concepts in philosophy as well, is really important. So we've gone through the era in education following the overall industrial revolution of being quite narrow. We narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. And the innovations for the future need people who think beyond the narrow, that you can learn by, Jack Welch, when he was running GE, was once asked what his role was. And he said, well, I'm a bumblebee. I'm taking pollen from one of my organizations to another. And it needs that kind of thinking. So, the great era of amateur science when you had people going out and doing things for themselves. We need some of that back in business in general, but in all the areas. So we're not just that narrow. That's a big challenge for the universities.
It certainly is, and I can relate well to it as well.
And I wish all your clients and yourselves all big success. It's not going to happen quickly, out of it. We're watching reoccurrence, but there are good things about this that we can take forward, providing we don't go back. I want to add one more thing, because when we were interviewing ourselves, people in medicine, and I was interviewing a CEO of a big pharmaceutical company, a big hospital, and they were saying how they were beginning to come up with ideas that normally they'd hit the bureaucracy with the government and it would take 2 years to do something. But in the early days of the panic, thanks to the Premier's office and some other things, people were saying, okay, let's get rid of that red tape, let's get on with it. So the other thing I want to see is, with all due caution to health and all the other things, we need to cut the red tape. I was going to use the CRAP word, but I'll stick to red tape, between institutions, because it builds up over time. It's like age and rust on your car. Some of it's important, but probably 70–80% is unnecessary. And if we're going to move forward and take advantage of what we've got to do, we've got to get rid of the silos, and we've got to get rid of that red tape.
Absolutely. And, we've seen necessity is the motherhood of invention, and the amount of innovation that's happened over the last 6 months relative to the previous 6 years is just incredible.
Absolutely.
Alan, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, welcome.
Your thoughtful insights. It's given us a lot to think about. And on behalf of the Poirier Group, as well as our viewers, really appreciate the time you spent.
Well, welcome.